Hey everyone, welcome. I'm Naomi, and today I want to follow up with one of my most recent videos, which was about how to engage your core muscles effectively and how to avoid some certain mistakes. And one of the questions that came up, well, what are the cues that you use as a teacher, and what are some of the actions that you use? And how do you communicate them? Because one of the people who watched that video said that, some of the common cues that she hears frequently are imagine, that you're putting on a tight pair of jeans, or suck in your belly, or imagine like you're getting punched in the gut, which, that's nice, right? Or, or like some other ones that are common that I've heard are like flatten your low back to the floor, or, things like that, or tuck your tailbone. That's another really big one. Tuck your tailbone is another really big one. And the problem with all of those cues is mostly that they're not sustainable. Okay, like you can't constantly act like you are getting punched in the belly for all kinds of reasons, mostly because it's not a particularly pleasant sensation, but also because it's only temporary, hopefully, right? You can't always act like you're putting on a tight pair of jeans. And what muscles does that really engage? So what I want to talk about are just a few cues and actions that I use in my own classes, as well as in my upcoming or my yoga series, not upcoming, it exists now, my yoga series, Yoga for a Healthy Core. And just ways that you can think about using your core that are more practical and also more effective. Okay, so the first thing that I like to talk about is something that I call neutral pelvis. Okay, now neutral pelvis sometimes looks like you're tucking your tailbone, and so what I want to do is actually show you the difference between tucking your tailbone and neutral pelvis, as well as over tilting your tailbone. Your pelvis. Anyway, you get the idea. Okay, so I'll show standing. Now, I want to give just a little caveat with this, which is that I am 21 weeks pregnant, so I have a lot more belly going on in front than I ordinarily do, so it actually makes me look like I'm tilting forward a little bit more. So look closely and carefully. So usually what happens is this idea of tucking your tailbone looks a lot like this. Okay, so when you tuck your tailbone goes down, you squeeze your butt, and your thighs thrust forward. Okay, now the opposite of tucking your tailbone is, taking the top of your pelvis forward, right? So you get this big arch through your low back. Okay, now the truth is that neutral pelvis is somewhere in between. Okay, you actually want to be somewhere in between this over tilt, right? And this means you have an anterior tilt. It's the top of your pelvis is tilting forward, anterior is forward. Whereas tucking your tailbone excessively, this is the tailbone tuck action. Notice that like the belly that I do have, like this 21-week pregnant belly, almost completely disappears. Okay, now what I'm going to say is that you might then think, oh, well then that helps engage my abs. No, that's not your abs. At that point, that's no longer your abdominal muscles working. Okay, like at that point, when you're tucking so much here, that's your butt squeezing, okay, and that's your thighs going forward. Okay, your abdominal muscles aren't really working so much, and what makes your belly look flatter is that you're pulling back so far into the back of your body that it looks flatter. It's not. Okay, so neutral pelvis. Okay, what usually happens again is we tend to tilt a little bit more anteriorly, not everybody, but a lot of people. So you want to take the top of your pelvis back and the bottom of your pelvis forward. Okay, so I'm going to put my hands up on my head so you can see. Starting in this anterior tilt, top of your pelvis goes back, bottom of your pelvis goes forward. Okay, that's neutral pelvis. Now this is tucking, right? See the difference there? Neutral pelvis versus tuck. Okay, now there are a couple of ways that you can feel the idea of neutral pelvis. Okay, the first way in some ways is the easiest, and you can do it on your back. Okay, so lie on your back. I'm going to put a blanket underneath me just for a little bit more comfort. But you can lie on your back with your knees bent, okay? And you can over tilt, right? Create that big excessive arch in your low back and then flatten your low back to the floor. And that flattening of your low back to the floor is just like tucking your tailbone. Now you might feel your low belly engage when you do that, but again, it's not sustainable. You can't keep it forever. So what you want to find is somewhere in between. So you want the top of your pelvis to go back, bottom of your pelvis to go forward. So that when you lift your leg, like one at a time, or even both, nothing changes, right? If you overtuck and you lift your legs, it's really hard to sustain. Same as if you're overarched, right? You can't really feel your pelvis working or your core working. You are going to feel your knees and your hips working. Okay, so that's one, and that's a really great place just to sort of feel it from the outset, okay? Another way that you can feel it is in a lunge, and this is one that I really like a lot, okay? So if you're in a lunge, step this way, with your right leg forward. If you lift your left knee a few inches away from the floor so it's hovering, okay, what you would do is just first give yourself that big anterior tilt of your pelvis, which is pretty natural here in a lunge. Okay, so that means you're leaning towards your front leg. And you want to lift the top of your pelvis up away from your thigh, bottom of your pelvis down. Now you're going to feel this a lot more in your left thigh than you are in your low belly, but this is creating neutral pelvis, right? So you can feel it. My pelvis is level here. I'm not over tucking, but what I've got is good engagement through my core. Okay, so another way that you can feel it is in that lunge. We'll do it on the other side, just so you can, see and feel. Okay, so you lift your bottom knee, back leg, a little bit away from the floor. Okay, where we tend to be is way forward in the lunge, belly resting on thigh. So you would lift the top of your pelvis up, bottom of your pelvis goes down. It's a lot easier to do it with your back knee bent. Okay, and you will feel a lot of the sensation in your left thigh, but you'll also feel a lot more stable and secure in your pelvis. Okay, so another great way to feel neutral pelvis is in that lunge with your back leg, knee hovering away from the floor. So not knee down, right? Knee lifted. Now you can actually do it with knee down, and I'll show that too. I'll show it here. You can do this with your knee down too, and just feel top of your pelvis up, bottom of your pelvis down. You can certainly feel that also there. I just find it's a little bit more impactful when my knee is away from the floor. So you can do it both ways, but that's definitely one of the big ways. Okay, so aiming for that quality of neutral pelvis is going to be incredibly beneficial when it comes to finding your core in any pose. Okay, so whether it's that lunge, whether it's on your back, whether you're in camel pose, right, and you're trying to find more core support in a back bend, right, you don't want to over-tuck and lean back because that's going to create a lot of strain on your belly and your thighs, but you do want to find neutral pelvis, okay, so that you have support through your core, okay, so neutral pelvis, really, really, really big one, okay. Now there's one other place that you can feel neutral pelvis, but I also want to talk about another action that you can think of in terms of engaging your core muscles. Okay, so instead of pulling on tight jeans, I actually like to think of like I'm wrapping myself in a coat. Like it's really cold outside and you're wrapping yourself in a coat. Okay, so if I do this from the side, again, and I'm just going to do this kneeling, if I wrap myself in a coat, my obliques and transverse abdominal muscles are going to engage a little bit more. Like they tense and tighten up in a good way. Okay, now again, you don't want to confuse this with rounding back or tucking your tailbone, but the effect is it draws your rib cage in, right? So you create a little bit more uniformity in the core of your body. So instead of letting your ribs and your belly pitch forward, right, which they are likely to do, right? If you wrap yourself in a coat, it creates this layer of support in your center, right, that is pretty solid and something that you can sustain. Now, one of the great ways to feel it is in plank pose, okay? So the way that you can feel it is if you step left leg behind you with your hands on the floor and shoulders over your wrists, you can create that anterior tilt of your pelvis, right? So you're over tilting, creating a big arch through your low back. Now, move the top of your pelvis up and back, bottom of your pelvis down, so you should feel more secure in your core, and then wrap around back to front. Lift your right knee so it hovers away from the floor an inch or two. Then extend your right leg back into plank. Okay, so you're not over rounding, you're not tucking your tailbone. Oof, that's painful. Okay, let's try on the other side. Extend your right foot straight back. At the same time, you want to make sure that your shoulders stay over your wrists. So you don't want to reach your leg back and come off of your wrists. You got to stay forward. Okay, move the top of your pelvis up and back, bottom of your pelvis down, and then wrap around back to front like you're putting a coat on. Lift your left knee so it hovers, and then extend your left leg back to your right. So not only will that teach you a really solid and strong way to get into plank pose, but it also teaches you a great way to combine two actions. So one of them is neutral pelvis, and the other is the wrap around. Okay, so I teach wrapping around a lot. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3 is actually not to think so much about being punched in the gut, which is really unpleasant, but to think of it more as a low belly and upper body contraction. Okay, so here's what I mean by that. And this is the way that I teach this all the time. Okay, so imagine that you are kicking a ball without bending your knee. So if you stand, I'll do it this way. If you stand on your right leg, imagine that you're kicking a ball with your left foot, but your leg is straight, and you pull your leg forward and up. Okay, if you do that action over and over again, you're going to feel this contraction in your lower belly. Those are your abdominal muscles working in concert with your hip flexors. Okay? Now, the really cool thing, if you want to feel your entire belly, is to create an entire contraction. Right? Now the thing is that you don't really want to be punched in the gut ever, but you also don't necessarily want that feeling, right? Why? Well, if somebody punches you in the gut, this is the shape that your body takes. I mean, for the most part. If somebody punches you in the gut, your head is going to go forward, right? Your neck is also going to go forward. Your body is going to go back. Now again, that will engage your core muscles temporarily. It's just not sustainable. It's also not a very nice action for your body. So I like to think of it more as like volleyball, which I did play even though I'm 5'2". Our team was sort of amazing, even though we were all shorties. We made it all the way to like county finals. We were awesome. If you've never played volleyball before, this reference might not make as much sense, but I'm still going to show it to you anyway. So the way that you can think of it is this, right? Your arms are overhead. I know you can't see my hands. That's all right. It doesn't matter. Okay, now imagine that you are pushing with 2 hands, slamming a ball down. Okay, so you slam down, but it stops because you're stopping right at the top of the net, because in volleyball, your hands can't touch the net, right? So you want it to stop right at the net. It's a low net in this case because you're not jumping, okay? So you want them to stop. That action will create a contraction in the top of your rectus abdominis, the top of your abs. Okay, now at the same time, you can create that action in your lower leg. So if you take your arms forward and your leg up, instead of getting sucked all the way back, you're just creating this little tiny contraction from top to bottom and engaging that muscle. Okay? Now a practical way of playing with it is thinking about it as a prep for Warrior 3 pose and many others. Here's what I mean. So let's say you're going to do this on your left leg. Arms go up. Okay? Now you would lift your right leg as though you're kicking that ball, right? Using both hands above your head to slam down. So you've got this contraction. Now keep it for as long as you can as you take your torso forward and your right leg back. And then keep it as you bring yourself all the way back up, and you've got that same contraction going in your core. Okay? So that's a really fun way to play with the idea of all of those 3 actions, but really primarily the contraction instead of, sucking in your belly. Okay? So hopefully this just gives you a little bit of an idea of ways that you can rethink how you engage your core. Okay, without using those cues like suck in your belly or, feel like you get punched in the stomach or tuck your tailbone, without using some of those cues that, are not particularly sustainable and not particularly helpful when it comes to engaging your core long term. But hopefully it also gives you some ways to rethink your practice, your core practice, when you're in a yoga class or on your yoga mat on your own, in a way that you can really feel it, but also not feel like you're overworking or overstressing out your muscles, your joints. And if you want more on this, please check out my Yoga for a Healthy Core series. It's a 5-week series, 16 videos, all really awesome, really creative, kind of out-of-the-box core work that will help you feel stronger and more confident and more capable in your body, not just in your core, but throughout. I know you'll love it, so check out the information for that in the description below. If you have any other questions about how to engage your core, please leave those in the comments. And thank you so much for asking this question. It was really fun to create this video. I hope that you enjoyed it too, and I will see you back on the mat really soon. Until then, bye.